Warning, the following video contains moderate spoilers of Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 story, as well as heavy spoilers of the first game. No late game footage will be shown, but the early hours of the game and many of its features and mechanics will be discussed in great detail.
I wrote a blog post a while ago about why I f***ing hate video games, because this is what it does. It appeals to like the male fantasy.
Good boy. Good boy.
So it's looking like 2025 is going to be an absolutely stacked year for not just RPGs, but gaming as a whole. Avowed has now released as of me making this video, which is nice because now I have to work on like 3 videos now. Thank you for being patient, by the way. We have Elden Ring Night Rain coming during the summer, and the sequel to one of my favorite RPGs of all time is releasing in March, Outward 2. But there's a pattern I'm noticing here. All of the titles I just mentioned are fantasy RPGs, rife with magic spells, grotesque monsters, and completely impractical suits of armor. Now, I'm not saying that any of that is bad, I love that shit, but that's pretty standard stuff for RPGs nowadays. However, one RPG would show up and prove to the world that you don't have to have your game set in a fantasy world in order to be a great RPG. Kingdom Come Deliverance was a debut title of newly established indie studio Warhorse Studios, and was a prime example of a diamond in the rough. KCD was unique in the RPG sphere as it gave up fireballs and dragons in favor of difficult-to-shoot longbows and an impeccable focus on historical accuracy. Just how much historical accuracy, you ask? Well, apparently the audio team recorded a bunch of birds to use for the ambient sounds of medieval Bohemia, but a historian informed them that they could hear a bird that didn't exist in the area at that time. So the audio team went back in and re-engineered the audio to specifically remove that one bird from the ambient sounds. That was how serious they were about the historical accuracy. In fact, it's so historically accurate that it landed the game into controversy, because mainstream gaming journalists looked at this beautiful rendition of medieval Bohemia, chock full of painstakingly crafted frescoes and murals painted on these breathtaking pieces of architecture, and they asked the most important question. Where's all the minorities? Where's the tokenized black person with vitiligo? I don't see any mastectomy scars on this birthing person. This is really problematic. Why can't Henry identify as non-binary and use they-them pronouns? What are the developers Now, of course I'm exaggerating here, but it is really cool to see an indie studio stick to their guns despite a few angry tweets and reviews. KCD felt like a true labor of love, and it's impressive just how much of a scope they were able to pull off with such a small dev team. It certainly wasn't without its faults, and it did have a bit of a rocky launch, but many of us have grown to love the game despite this. The quirks add to its charm, and let's be honest, after playing games like Skyrim and pretty much any Bethesda RPG, a lot of us have kind of grown to expect a lot of jank and bugs in open world games. The game had a very well written story, but it also had a bit of a brief ending. There was a lot more of Henry's story to tell, so this game was perfectly set up for a sequel. Thus, in April of 2024, a sequel would be announced and everyone's bellies immediately started growling again for more KCD content.
I feel quite hungry.
Cut to 2025, and now it is here in our hands. Does KCD2 expand upon the first game? What new things did they add? What did they take away? Well, let's dive into the shoes of Henry of Skalitz once again as we experience what could very well be the Terminator 2 of the medieval times. This is Kingdom Come Deliverance 2.
The most adventure I was expecting was a fuck or two.
Kingdom Come Deliverance really took the show with their eclectic cast of characters. Not only is it impressive that the characters are based on real-life historical figures, but to also make them charming and memorable is quite the accomplishment. Henry is a peasant, the son of a blacksmith who was supposed to deliver a specially made sword to a nobleman, Sir Radzig Kobyla. However, Henry's home village of Skalitz gets raided by Hungarian mercenaries, the Cumans, and Henry watches as his parents get killed. Henry escapes, tries to get revenge, and loses his sword in the process. He then gets taken under the wing of Radzig, who serves as a mentor figure to Henry. His calm and collected demeanor has a significant impact on Henry's growth throughout the game. He's almost like a father to Henry. That is until you progress further in the game and you realize that Radzig is Henry's father. Along the way, Henry will befriend and work alongside various other charming characters, like the hot-tempered Sir Hanush, love interest Teresa, who gets her own DLC content centered around stealth and her escape from Skalitz, and Lord Hans Capon, heir to Major Town Rete. He comes off as a complete snooty brat at first, but Henry and Hans eventually open up and form a bit of a bromance between each other. The story ends with Henry escorting Hans outside of the playable area to deliver a letter to another lord who's torn between supporting King Wenceslas or Sigismund. And honestly, just watch the official KCD1 recap if you don't know anything about that political shit. It is way too much to explain here. KCD2 starts almost hours after the first game, as Henry and Hans travel to Trotsky Castle to deliver the letter. Now, one of the questions I had was how they were going to reset Henry back to square one. In the first game, you went from a peasant to a complete warrior, taking part in these massive medieval battles and cutting through hordes of humans. How can we go back from that? Well, Capon fancies a dip in a local pond, so Henry strips himself of all of his armor and they go frolicking in the pond.
What's the matter? Females!
Uh-oh, now bandits are attacking and they have no armor. Henry gets hit by an arrow, falls down a cliff, and generally just gets absolutely smoked, requiring the aid of a local herbalist to get back to a functioning state. The first 5 hours of the game will consist of getting back on your feet and restarting from scratch. Since Henry nor Hans have the letter they were supposed to deliver, nor the fancy clothes they could have used to establish themselves as nobility, they're pretty much peasants again. So I'd say that's probably the best they could have done to reset the player. I think they did a good job of explaining the events of KCD1 in the prologue for KCD2, so you don't have to have played the first game in order to figure out what's going on. Henry outright explains some of his backstory to his travel buddies, and he experiences flashbacks and nightmares while being rescued by Capon. You'll immediately notice a difference with KCD2 because you now have the ability to quick chat to various NPCs. You can engage in small talk with them or even berate them in combat.
You fight like an old hag! Bastard!
Warhorse looks to have taken inspiration from RDR2 because strangers will often greet you or comment on various states you're in, which adds to the realism. NPCs will comment on your drunken state, and you can choose a friendly response or an antagonistic response, whichever way you feel at the time.
You're making a fool of yourself drinking like that.
I already am a fool, I'll have you know. But I am embarrassed.
Dialogue is also enhanced with different kinds of speech checks. In the first game, you generally had 3 different ways of influencing dialogue, through the strength stat, the speech stat, and the charisma stat, which can all be leveled or manipulated through clothing to achieve different outcomes. KCD2 expands upon that by branching off speech checks to different attributes. You can intimidate someone, deceive them, attempt to coerce them, or convince them of your skills by passing certain skill checks. If you tell someone you're an archer when Henry doesn't know jack shit about archery, then of course he's going to babble on about something he has no idea about, and the NPC will likely see through that and call him out on it. Now we can talk about the skills, which have undergone some massive changes as well. KCD introduced a large host of skills that Henry can partake in, and like most other skills or trades, you absolutely suck at it at first. But if you spend some time dedicating yourself to the craft, then you can become insanely good at it and reap some benefits. KCD2 streamlines many of the skills, but I think this is for the better. Alchemy returns in all its glory, requiring you to accurately follow a recipe through an extensive process of adding different agents, crushing in different herbs, and boiling the cauldron at different intervals. Now you can get different grades of concoctions based on how closely you follow the recipe. If you get your timings perfect and all your ingredients in check, you'll get a strong quality potion. But if you boil the cauldron for too long or mess up anything else, you'll get a lower quality potion. Herbalism and hunting were their own separate skills in the first game, but they have now been combined together into the survivalist skill, which can be increased by picking herbs and flowers, hunting game, preparing meat and herbs in these newly added smokehouses and drying stations, and discovering new locations. This skill can provide some pretty strong perks, like the Leshy perk that gives you a stamina boost while you're in a forested region, and considering the entire game world takes place in a massive forest, you will have plenty of areas that can activate the perk. One of the more useful perks is Lucky Find, which gives me a chance to discover a small treasure while picking herbs, which I used during the early game as a decent moneymaker. I spent literal hours out in the fields picking flowers in order to farm trinkets, and I would seriously almost shit my pants when I would come across a more valuable flower like a marigold, which can be used for health potions through the alchemy skill or dried and sold to merchants. Now you have a pretty good reason to chill outside of a village just filling your basket with fragrant flowers. The ladies absolutely love it, but you know what they say, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So let's talk about the combat.
I feel quite hungry!
Combat in KCD1 took some getting used to. A lot of action RPGs simplified attacks to just one or two buttons, maybe a light or heavy attack, and maybe some active skills set to other buttons. But KCD used a direction-based attack system, requiring you to lock on your target and select one of 5 angles to swing from, plus a thrust move. This can work okay for one-on-one combat, but this becomes really clunky when fighting multiple enemies. Now that does make sense, considering realistically it would be difficult to manage multiple enemies at once in a sword fight, and you would probably lose. However, the numerous angles of attack, plus the combos, perfect blocks, riposts, etc., made the combat very in-depth but also confusing at times. KCD2 streamlines the combat by reducing the number of attacks from 6 down to 4. A top slash, left and right slash, and the bottom section is now the thrust. This makes the combos and riposts much easier to use, so it maintains that skill gap while also keeping it mostly realistic. I will admit though that combat in the early game gets pretty annoying. You only have a few maneuvers to use, like the active block and a riposte, but these are a beginner's trap. It's intended to perform a fast strike to throw your opponent off guard right after an active block, but I found that 90% of the time the enemy would just block your riposte and initiate a riposte themselves, leading to a back and forth battle of riposte attrition as you whittle down each other's stamina bar with constant riposts. Combat really opens up once you progress through the game a bit and learn the Master Strike. Basically, you guard in the opposite direction the opponent is swinging in, and you attack instead of block during the active block window. If done correctly, you will perform a snazzy looking counter move, and if the Master Strike kills your opponent outright, it will trigger a snazzier looking execution animation. Adding the combos on top of the Master Strikes makes you feel like a true swordsman, and the weightier swings and hit responses make the combat much more engaging than the first game while still retaining the difficulty curve. You're still gonna get smacked around by multiple enemies at the beginning of the game, but don't worry, once you progress further in the game, you can make up for your lack of swordsmanship skills by literally popping a cap into your enemy's ass.
Go to hell!
That's right, contrary to popular belief, firearms did exist during the medieval period, but they're a lot simpler in design, more unstable, and you'd be lucky to hit the broadside of a cottage with one. But none of that matters because guns are scary. If only medieval peasants could see the evolution of firearms technology like the AR-15 and its terrifying, bumpy black plastic parts and 30-round, fully semi-automatic magazine clips. Every night I dream about this beast going off on its own and slaughtering every school it has stored into its growing hippocampus. Anyways, firearms are incredibly inaccurate but can dish out crazy amounts of damage, and sometimes just the sound of these guns alone are enough to make your enemy turn tail and run for the hills.
No, I give up!
Firearms aren't the only new weapon type, as you also have a wide assortment of crossbows, and God bless Warhorse for actually implementing crossbows realistically. Medieval crossbows were much more unwieldy than people think, with some requiring an external tool called a goat's foot, and some utilizing an entire pulley system to wind back the bowstring. Trust me, you do not want to miss a shot with a crossbow because it'll be taking you 5 to 7 business days to pull back that string. Polearms are now available to be equipped, which was not the case in the first game for whatever reason, and you now have a wider assortment of swords which have thankfully been consolidated into one skill. The armor system has also been improved, allowing you to lower or lift the visor to your helmet at any moment, which helps to not only protect you when you need it, but also to keep your vision unobstructed when you need it. Plus, it looks pretty cool sometimes.
Great.
There's no justice without...
Speaking of looking cool, let's get down to the fashion. KCD stood out amongst the RPG crowd for having a unique layered armor system. A knight isn't just a glorified tin can. Underneath that plate armor are layers and layers of extra garments and equipment to better protect the wearer in a multitude of scenarios. In KCD, you had several armor slots, including 4 different body slots. One for an undershirt, one for a padded jacket like a gambeson or an akiton, a 3rd layer for mail, and a 4th for plate armor. Of course, you can mix and match any of these pieces to create a truly unique looking Henry, and these armor pieces contributed to much more than just looks and armor values. What you wear will have a direct impact on how you play the game. Stealth is influenced by a number of different things, but your armor attributes play a key part in determining your chances of detection. If you're trying to sneak into a fortress and you're wearing a lavish, brightly colored hood and clanky, reflective plate armor, you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb. Instead, you should wear jet black clothing, lightweight enough to not make noise, but also not suspicious suspicious enough that you don't look like a stereotypical cat burglar to the local guard. All of this makes a glorious return in the sequel. Another fantastic addition is the outfit system, letting you swap between 3 different presets so you don't have to spend 30 minutes assembling your outfit. Now you can swap to your charismatic noble attire on the fly so you can pass those speech checks much quicker. A slight annoyance with the armor system though is just how quickly you get dirty without any perks affecting cleanliness. Henry can come clean out of the bathhouse, punch one bandit, and instantly be covered head to toe in blood like he just went 3 rounds in the octagon. You're constantly washing yourself off in troughs and bathhouses to reduce the negative impact on your stealth and charisma, but they do make it a bit better by allowing you to clean your clothes at these bathing spots dotted around the map. If you have soap in your inventory, then you can launder your clothes and clean yourself without having to visit the baths and have to be swooned at by those disgusting, promiscuous bathhouse wenches. Like, ugh. Speaking of wenches, we need to transition to the plot of the game. The story takes Henry and Hans Capon into the Trotsky region to deliver the letter, but after getting ambushed by bandits, Henry has to get back onto his feet and get into contact with Otto von Berghoff, the Lord referenced at the end of the first game who's torn between supporting King Wenceslas or Sigismund. The first major part of the story involves a wedding that Henry attends in order to get a chance at contacting Berghoff. This adds a whole slew of small micro objectives to complete in a small area that you can complete at your leisure. At the early part of the quest, you can choose to steal a man's girl and then dance with another girl, whack the groom with a wooden sword and bloody up his Sunday best, and steal booze for a bunch of Moravians. If it wasn't already obvious, Henry likes to party. This really took me back to the first game, specifically the section where you had to find a spy posing as a novice monk in the town's monastery. In order to get to him, you had to become a monk yourself, so this whole section of the story was like a beautiful marriage between a murder mystery and Shawshank Redemption. You were running around this monastery gathering clues while also shirking your monastic duties and avoiding the Catholic police, or as I like to call them, the Pope-po. I'll see myself to the gallows. There were multiple ways you could discover the mole, and you had the choice of either killing him or helping him escape and either letting him go or apprehending them. This made the monastery quest one of my favorite quests ever in RPGs, and for the most part I feel that again in Kingdom Come 2, but I feel this time around that Warhorse took that idea and stretched it a bit too far. Naturally, you're going to be on rails for a good section of the beginning to get yourself on your feet and introduce you to the world, but then you attend a wedding where you can't leave without completing all the objectives, and then you get into a fight because Henry got caught talking to the bride in the cellar. Like I said, Henry likes to party. You then get thrown into jail and have to save Hans Capon from getting hanged, so you have to run around this castle trying to find a method of freeing Capon by completing more micro objectives without being able to leave. Then once all that clears, you meet von Berghoff, who sends you on another mission where you're tethered to Hans Capon as you visit another fortress, and you have to complete another set of micro objectives without being able to leave. I get that this was all part of the build up to Act 2, and the game does warn you when you're about to reach a critical point of the story, but getting these missions back to back without even getting the chance to run out and sell some of your things or complete a side quest got really exhausting. Now it was all worth it because after all that, you get introduced to an entirely new playable region, the Kuttenberg region. At first I discovered the entirety of the Trotsky region. That is, I uncovered all of the clouds to reveal another beautifully hand-drawn map with charming illustrations and embellishments. I looked at the map and thought, wow, that's a pretty big map, it's definitely bigger than the first game, and then my jaw hit the floor once I realized this was only half of the playable area. Once you unlock the Kuttenberg region, you can use a cart to travel back and forth between the two regions, and this is where the game really opens up. The city of Kuttenberg itself is absolutely massive, and I spent a whole in-game day just exploring all the little shops and merchant stands peppered throughout the town, witnessing the beautiful whitewashed buildings, the massive cathedral with beggars strewn about, the shit-covered hooligans caving each other's heads in.
Pray for a quick death, you bastard!
The true European experience. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 brings the same magic that was experienced in the first game, with a historically authentic world bursting with character and liveliness. Exploring the world and witnessing medieval life will add entries to your codex, and it's so fascinating to read through all the small nuances of medieval life. The developers even include notes detailing whether or not the locations or people in the game are historically accurate or not. The Trotsky Ponds, for example, didn't exist in that area until the 1600s, and there's a skeleton in one of the Kuttenberg taverns that's based off a Czech folktale. It may not be entirely historically accurate, but it feels very historically authentic, meaning it feels like it's historically accurate, which is much more important. I mean, we all love Saving Private Ryan as a historically accurate World War II movie, but the only historically accurate part was the D-Day scene at the beginning of the movie. Everything else was entirely fictitious, taking place in fictitious towns and cities. But nobody really cares because that movie is fucking awesome and it feels like it really could have happened. It's not historically accurate, but it's historically authentic. Kingdom Come Deliverance and its sequel is exactly like that, and for that, this could be one of the best, if not the best, medieval game on the market. Period. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, while still being a bit rough around the edges, is an absolute treat to play and experience. The cutscenes are so well done that it feels like you're watching a high-budget Netflix series with an RPG game built in on the side. The new additions to the game build upon and improve what was seen in the first game, which is exactly what you would want in a sequel. I want a sequel to be exactly like the first game, but just give me 10% more. And KCD2 well surpassed those expectations. Now with that said, if you didn't like the first game for whatever reason, the sequel likely won't be changing your mind. It's not an uber casual action-adventure game where you blitz from one objective to the next. You're heavily incentivized, if not forced at times, to stop and really take in the environment and appreciate the small details. The developers slaved away to bake in all these details and make the world come alive as a true reflection of medieval culture. The numerous references to Czech stories and folklore, and just the way Warhorse presented the game with this entertaining live-action web series starring the actors for Henry and Hans, really make it feel like another labor of love. And I'll definitely be pumping in more than 100 hours exploring every nook and cranny, and maybe shooting a couple of peasants along the way.
Now you're gonna get it! Oh!
Did I do a good job of covering KCD2? Was there something missing that I should have mentioned? Let me know in the comments below. This is an absolutely massive game and I'd love to hear everyone's favorite moment with it. Also, I need to mention once again that I now have an official Discord channel. I'll provide the link to that in the description, so if you want to join and chat about everything RPG and FPS, then knock yourself out. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to stuff a lead ball into a tiki torch and trigger every car alarm within a 4-block radius, just as the founding fathers intended. Stay safe.